Iran and Israel, from cooperation to rivalry in the Middle East. Before we begin, welcome ladies and gentlemen. In the 1970s, Iran and Israel were not enemies. Iranian oil flowed to Israel, intelligence officials communicated, security cooperation existed behind the scenes. Although much of this relationship remained discreet, the two countries shared strategic interests in a region shaped by Cold War competition and regional uncertainty. Today, however, Iran and Israel are widely viewed as two of the Middle East's most significant rivals. Their competition extends beyond their own borders, influencing political, military, and diplomatic developments across the region. How did this transformation occur? How did a relationship that once involved cooperation evolve into one of the Middle East's most enduring rivalries? To answer that question, we need to begin with a period that is often overlooked, a time when Iran and Israel quietly worked together. Chapter 1. When Iran and Israel were quiet strategic partners, 1950 to 1979. The roots of cooperation between Iran and Israel can be traced back to the early years of Israel's existence. In 1950, Iran extended de facto recognition to Israel, making it one of the few Muslim-majority countries to do so at the time. Although relations remained relatively discreet, cooperation gradually expanded throughout the following decades. Under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran and Israel found common strategic interests. Iranian oil flowed through the Eilat-Ashkelon pipeline, providing Israel with energy access while generating revenue for Iran. Intelligence and security cooperation also developed behind the scenes, including exchanges concerning regional developments and common security concerns. For Israel, this relationship formed part of what became known as the Periphery Doctrine, a strategy aimed at building ties with non-Arab regional actors, such as Iran and Turkey, in order to counterbalance hostility from neighboring Arab states. For Iran, cooperation with Israel was largely pragmatic. It provided access to technology, intelligence cooperation, and broader international connections while helping maintain regional balance. This relationship was never a formal alliance, but it was substantial enough that both countries benefited from it. Yet, if cooperation appeared to serve the interests of both sides, why did this period of quiet partnership come to an end? Chapter 2. The 1979 Revolution and the End of Cooperation. The answer begins in 1979. That year, the Iranian Revolution transformed Iran's political system and foreign policy orientation. The Shah was overthrown, and the Islamic Republic emerged under Ayatollah Khomeini. The shift was immediate and highly symbolic. Shortly after the revolution, the former Israeli embassy in Tehran was handed to the Palestine Liberation Organization. This act signaled a dramatic change in Iran's foreign policy priorities and demonstrated the new government's support for the Palestinian cause. From that point forward, Israel was no longer viewed as a strategic partner. Instead, support for the Palestinian cause became a central element of Iran's regional identity. At the same time, relations with many Western powers also deteriorated, fundamentally reshaping Iran's international posture. Yet history is rarely straightforward. Even after the revolution, limited covert military cooperation briefly continued during the Iran-Iraq War. In the early 1980s, Israel provided military assistance to Iran because both countries viewed Saddam Hussein's Iraq as a significant threat. Nevertheless, these contacts did not reverse the broader trend. The partnership had ended, and a new phase of the relationship had begun. But if cooperation had ended, how did political separation gradually become regional rivalry? Chapter 3. From political separation to regional rivalry, 1980s present. Beginning in the 1980s, competition between Iran and Israel increasingly expanded beyond bilateral relations. Rather than fighting each other directly, both countries became involved in a broader struggle for influence across the Middle East. One of the most important developments occurred in Lebanon during the early 1980s. Following Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon, Hezbollah emerged as a significant actor with training, funding, and ideological support from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. Over time, Iran's regional influence expanded across multiple theaters. The Iraq War in 2003 created opportunities for Shia political parties and groups with close ties to Iran to gain greater influence. Later, the Syrian civil war beginning in 2011 saw Iran become a key supporter of the government of Bashar al-Assad. Meanwhile, Israel increasingly viewed these developments through the lens of national security. As Iran's regional influence grew, Israeli policymakers became increasingly concerned about the presence of Iranian-aligned actors and other forces they viewed as direct security threats operating closer to Israel's borders, particularly in Lebanon and Syria. The United States also played a continuous role throughout this period through its close strategic relationship with Israel, its broader regional policies, and later its involvement in diplomatic efforts concerning Iran's nuclear program. What began as political separation gradually evolved into a broader geopolitical rivalry embedded across the Middle East. But if Iran and Israel rarely fought one another directly, where did this competition actually take place? Chapter 4, Shadow Conflict Across the Middle East, 1990s Present. The rivalry increasingly took the form of what many analysts describe as a shadow conflict. Instead of conventional war, competition unfolded through indirect means: proxy relationships, intelligence operations, cyber activities, and covert actions. In Lebanon, Hezbollah became one of the most prominent dimensions of this competition. In Gaza, groups such as Hamas added another layer of complexity. However, relations between Iran and Hamas were not always straightforward. Between 2011 and 2015, tensions emerged when Iran supported Bashar al-Assad during the Syrian civil war, while Hamas largely backed elements of the Syrian opposition. Conflicts in Iraq and Syria created additional arenas where Iranian and Israeli interests intersected indirectly. At the same time, intelligence operations and cyber activities became increasingly important. Between 2010 and 2012, several Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated in incidents widely attributed by international observers to Israeli intelligence operations. Another widely discussed example was the Stuxnet cyber operation discovered in 2010, which targeted elements of Iran's nuclear infrastructure at Natanz. Although neither country officially claimed responsibility, the operation is widely attributed to cooperation between the United States and Israel. By this stage, the relationship was no longer confined to diplomacy or ideology. It had evolved into a multidimensional competition spanning military, political, intelligence, and technological domains. Yet among all these issues, one question would eventually become the most sensitive and consequential of all. What role would Iran's nuclear program play in shaping the future of this rivalry? Chapter 5, The Nuclear Issue and Regional Security, 2000s Present. Since the early 2000s, Iran's nuclear program has become one of the central issues in the rivalry. From Israel's perspective, the possibility of a nuclear-capable Iran raises serious concerns about regional security and strategic balance. From Iran's perspective, the program is presented as a sovereign right linked to scientific development, energy needs, and technological advancement. Iran officially maintains that its nuclear program is intended for peaceful purposes. At the same time, the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, has documented evidence indicating that Iran conducted activities related to nuclear weapons research prior to 2003. These competing perspectives have contributed to years of diplomatic negotiations, sanctions, and international debate. In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the JCPOA, sought to reduce tensions by placing limits on Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. However, the United States withdrew from the agreement in 2018, creating new uncertainty and contributing to renewed tensions. Following the withdrawal, Iran gradually reduced compliance with certain provisions of the agreement and increased uranium enrichment levels. At the same time, recent years have witnessed increasingly direct exchanges between Iran and Israel, raising concerns that the long-running shadow conflict could become more overt. The nuclear issue is therefore no longer simply a bilateral concern. It has become part of a broader international debate involving regional powers, global institutions, and major world powers. So after decades of political transformation, regional competition, shadow conflict, and nuclear tensions, what broader lessons can we draw from this history? Conclusion. The story of Iran and Israel is not simply a story of conflict. It is a story of how international relationships can change dramatically over time. A partnership shaped by strategic interests during the Cold War gradually gave way to ideological differences, regional competition, security concerns, and geopolitical rivalry. Understanding this evolution helps explain not only relations between Iran and Israel, but also many of the wider dynamics that continue to shape the Middle East today. As history demonstrates, international rivalries are rarely static. They evolve alongside changing political circumstances, shifting perceptions, and new strategic realities. While no one can predict the future with certainty, several factors are likely to influence the next phase of this rivalry, including the future of nuclear diplomacy, the trajectory of regional conflicts, and the policies adopted by major powers such as the United States, Russia, and China. Whether the coming years bring greater confrontation, renewed diplomacy, or an entirely different form of interaction remains uncertain. What is certain is that the relationship between Iran and Israel will continue to influence the Middle East and the wider international system for years to come. Thank you for watching.